January 22nd, 1962. Cinecittà Studios, Rome. Two of Hollywood's biggest stars prepare for their first scene together in the most expensive film ever made. Elizabeth Taylor, 30 years old, married to singer Eddie Fisher for 3 years. The world's highest-paid actress, earning a record $1 million for playing Cleopatra. Richard Burton, 36 years old, married to Sybil Williams for 13 years, father of 2 daughters, a Welsh coal miner's son who became one of Britain's greatest stage actors. They've never worked together before. They've barely spoken to each other off-set. But when the cameras roll and they perform their first scene as Cleopatra and Mark Antony, something extraordinary happens. Producer Walter Wanger writes in his journal that night, "There comes a time during the making of a movie when the actors become the characters they play. It was quiet, and you could almost feel the electricity between Liz and Burton. Within weeks, that electricity would explode into the most scandalous affair in Hollywood history. The Vatican would condemn their erotic vagrancy. 2 marriages would be destroyed. The global media would create the first modern celebrity obsession, branding them Liz and Dick. And the most expensive film ever made would become the backdrop for a love story that changed how the world thought about celebrity, marriage, and morality. This is the story of the affair that shocked the world and created modern celebrity culture. When Richard Burton arrived at Cinecittà in January 1962, Elizabeth Taylor was already the undisputed queen of the production. She had been filming for 4 months, surviving a near-fatal illness that had shut down production for weeks and cost the studio millions. Burton's first impression was typically blunt. "She was so extraordinarily beautiful that I nearly laughed out loud. I'd never seen anything like her in my life. Such glamour, such presence." But he also noted her professionalism. She knew her lines, hit her marks, and commanded every scene. Elizabeth's first impression of Richard was less flattering. "I thought he was rather full of himself, very Welsh, very theatrical, and not particularly attractive physically." She had expected someone taller, more classically handsome for the role of Mark Antony. But chemistry on film sets often has nothing to do with first impressions, and everything to do with the magic that happens when cameras roll and 2 performers discover they can create something together that neither could achieve alone. Their first scene together was deceptively simple. Cleopatra meeting Mark Antony for the first time, sizing each other up as potential allies or enemies. The dialogue was sharp, witty, filled with sexual tension and political maneuvering. "The moment we started acting together, everything changed," Burton recalled years later. "She wasn't just beautiful anymore. She was magnificent. Powerful, intelligent, dangerous. Everything Cleopatra should be." Director Joseph Mankiewicz immediately recognized what was happening. "I could see it in the rushes," he told producer Wanger. "These 2 weren't just playing their characters well. They were becoming them. The romantic scenes were going to be extraordinary." But Mankiewicz also sensed danger. Both actors were married, both had reputations to protect, and the film was already under intense scrutiny due to its massive budget and Elizabeth's recent health crisis. "I started watching them more carefully during breaks," Mankiewicz admitted later. "The way they talked to each other, the way they looked at each other. It was clear that something was developing beyond professional admiration." The Italian film crew, more relaxed about romantic relationships than their American counterparts, were among the first to notice the change. Signora Taylor and Signor Burton They were always talking together now, recalled Assistant Director Franco Zeffirelli. Not about the script, not about the scenes. About books, about poetry, about life. Burton was famous for his intelligence and his love of literature. Elizabeth, often dismissed by critics as merely beautiful, was actually well-read and fascinated by intellectual conversation. They discovered they could talk for hours about everything from Welsh poetry to ancient history to modern politics. Richard was the first man who talked to me like I had a brain, Elizabeth said later. Most men either wanted to protect me because I was beautiful or use me because I was famous. Richard challenged me intellectually. Their conversations during lunch breaks grew longer. They began requesting script changes so they could have more scenes together. Other cast members started noticing that they seemed to forget about their respective spouses during working hours. Eddie Fisher would come to visit Elizabeth on set, and you could see her energy change. Observed actor Roddy McDowell playing Octavian. She became more subdued, less vibrant. But when she was talking with Richard, she glowed. By February 1962, the whispers among the cast and crew had become open speculation. Were Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton having an affair? And if so, what would happen when the world found out? The answer would shock even Hollywood insiders who thought they had seen everything. The transformation from professional attraction to personal obsession happened gradually, then suddenly. By February 1962, Elizabeth and Richard were spending every possible moment together, creating elaborate justifications for why they needed to rehearse scenes privately or discuss character motivation over dinner. They weren't fooling anyone except themselves, recalled cinematographer Leon Shamroy. When you've been in this business as long as I have, you can spot an affair developing from a mile away. The way they moved around each other, the way their voices changed when they spoke to each other. It was obvious to everyone on set. The first public hint came during a break in filming when Richard was overheard reciting Dylan Thomas poetry to Elizabeth in his famous Welsh voice. She listened with an attention she had never shown to Eddie Fisher's singing or any of her previous husband's talents. Richard opened up a world of literature and philosophy that I'd never experienced, Elizabeth admitted years later. These forgotten stories deserve to be told. If you think so too, subscribe and like this video. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. He could quote Shakespeare, Welsh poetry, ancient Greek plays. He made me feel intellectually alive for the first time in my life. But the attraction wasn't purely intellectual. Richard Burton possessed a raw masculinity that Elizabeth found irresistible. Unlike her previous husbands, the weak Nicky Hilton, the much older Michael Wilding, the tragic Mike Todd, the sweet but ineffectual Eddie Fisher, Richard was her equal in passion, intelligence, and professional stature. Liz was unlike any woman I'd ever known, Burton wrote in his diary. Beautiful, yes, but also fierce, demanding, complicated. She could match me drink for drink, wit for wit, passion for passion. She was magnificent and impossible. The turning point came in mid-February when they filmed the scene where Cleopatra seduces Mark Antony on her royal barge. The sexual tension that had been building for weeks exploded into the most authentic love scene either had ever performed. We weren't acting anymore, Elizabeth said later. We were Cleopatra and Antony. But we were also Elizabeth and Richard. The line between the characters and ourselves had completely disappeared. Mankiewicz, watching the dailies, knew he had captured something extraordinary and potentially devastating. The chemistry was so intense it was almost embarrassing to watch. You felt like you were intruding on something private and powerful. By March, their affair was no longer a secret among the cast and crew. Elizabeth and Richard made no effort to hide their attraction, arriving at the studio together, leaving together, spending every break in deep conversation or intense eye contact. It became awkward for everyone, remembered production designer John DeQuire. Eddie Fisher would visit the set, and you could cut the tension with a knife. Richard's wife Sybil came to Rome, and it was painfully obvious that her husband was obsessed with another woman. The professional consequences began immediately. Elizabeth, normally punctual and prepared, started arriving late to set because she'd been up all night talking with Richard. Their romantic scenes required fewer takes because their chemistry was so natural. But their individual scenes suffered because they were distracted when they weren't together. Richard would be performing a scene with Rex Harrison or Roddy McDowell, but his eyes would keep drifting to wherever Elizabeth was standing. Noted script supervisor Meta Rebner. And Elizabeth couldn't concentrate on any scene that didn't include Richard. The Italian press, always alert to romantic drama, began reporting rumors about the two stars, but these early stories were dismissed by most international media as typical European gossip about Hollywood celebrities. That dismissive attitude would soon change dramatically when the affair exploded into worldwide headlines and moral outrage. The first major leak came from an unlikely source, Joseph Mankiewicz himself. By March 1962, the director was exhausted from trying to manage both the massive production and the increasingly obvious affair between his two leads. In a private conversation with producer Walter Wanger, Mankiewicz finally admitted what everyone could see. "I have been sitting on a volcano all alone for too long, and I want to give you some facts you ought to know. Liz and Burton are not just playing Antony and Cleopatra." Wanger was horrified. The film was already over budget and behind schedule. A major scandal involving adultery could destroy any chance of commercial success and turn the production into a financial disaster for 20th Century Fox. "We have to manage this carefully," Wanger told Mankiewicz. "If this becomes public knowledge, it could ruin not just the film, but both their careers. Remember what happened to Ingrid Bergman when she had an affair with Roberto Rossellini." But managing celebrity scandals in 1962 was impossible, in ways that seemed quaint by modern standards. The entertainment press was smaller, but more morally judgmental. International media was hungry for stories that confirmed European stereotypes about American moral decadence. The story broke wide in early April, when Italian photographer Marcello Geppetti captured Elizabeth and Richard kissing passionately on a restaurant balcony in Rome. The photographs appeared first in European tabloids, then spread rapidly to American newspapers and magazines. "Taylor and Burton in torrid Roman affair," screamed the headlines. "Cleopatra's real-life romance rocks Hollywood." The public reaction was immediate and intense. Elizabeth, already controversial for her marriage to Eddie Fisher, which had broken up America's sweethearts Debbie Reynolds and Eddie, was now branded as a serial homewrecker who destroyed marriages for her own pleasure. "The mail was unbelievable," recalled Elizabeth's publicist. "Thousands of letters calling her everything from a whore to a destroyer of Christian family values." The religious groups were organizing boycotts of the film. But the most shocking condemnation came from an unexpected source: the Vatican. On April 18, 1962, L'Osservatore Romano, the official Vatican newspaper, published an extraordinary open letter addressed directly to Elizabeth Taylor. The paper, which spoke with the moral authority of Pope John XXIII, condemned her erotic vagrancy and accused her of debasing the institution of marriage. "This woman has given scandal to the world," the Vatican statement read. "Her behavior is contrary to the natural law and to the moral teachings of Christ. She brings shame not only upon herself, but upon all women who look to cinema for moral guidance." The Vatican condemnation elevated the story from entertainment gossip to international diplomatic incident. Here was the Holy See, representing 600 million Catholics worldwide, directly attacking an American movie star for her personal behavior. "I couldn't believe it when I read it," Elizabeth said years later. "The Pope was condemning me personally. Me, for falling in love. It felt surreal and terrifying." The American media response was equally dramatic, but more divided. Conservative publications echoed the Vatican's moral outrage, while liberal voices defended Elizabeth's right to pursue happiness, even if it meant ending failed marriages. Vatican blasts Liz Taylor became front-page news across America. Editorial pages debated whether celebrity behavior should be subject to religious judgment, whether adultery by public figures corrupted social values, and whether Hollywood had a responsibility to maintain moral standards. If you want more untold stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Your support means everything to us. The controversy reached such intensity that the U.S. Congress considered hearings about the moral influence of motion pictures on American youth. Several state legislators proposed bills to ban the importation of morally offensive films. It was the first modern celebrity scandal, observed media historian Neil Gabler. The Elizabeth Taylor-Richard Burton affair created the template for how personal lives of famous people would be dissected, judged, and consumed by mass media. The global reaction split along cultural lines that revealed deep differences about marriage, morality, and personal freedom. European newspapers generally defended Elizabeth and Richard as victims of puritanical American hypocrisy. Latin American Catholic countries largely supported the Vatican position. Asian press focused on the enormous cost of the film and the business implications of the scandal. But perhaps most significantly, the scandal created the first truly global celebrity obsession. Liz and Dick became a brand, a shorthand for passionate, destructive, irresistible love that transcended normal moral boundaries. The world was watching, judging, and consuming every detail of their affair. And the personal cost for everyone involved was about to become devastating. While the world debated the morality of Elizabeth and Richard's affair, two marriages were quietly disintegrating under the pressure of global scrutiny and personal betrayal. Eddie Fisher, Elizabeth's fourth husband, was perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire scandal. He had already sacrificed his career and reputation to marry Elizabeth after her third husband, Mike Todd's death, leaving America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds, in the process. Eddie was desperately trying to save his marriage while the whole world was watching it fall apart, recalled friend and fellow entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. He kept flying back and forth to Rome, trying to win Elizabeth back, but it was obvious to everyone except Eddie that it was over. Fisher's attempts to reclaim his wife became increasingly desperate and public. He gave interviews defending Elizabeth's character, insisting that the Burton rumors were exaggerated, and promising that their marriage would survive the temporary difficulties caused by the pressures of filming. "I love my wife," Fisher told reporters outside the Dorchester Hotel in Rome. "These stories about Richard Burton are just publicity for the film. Elizabeth is a devoted wife and mother who is working hard on the most difficult role of her career." But privately, Fisher was devastated by what he witnessed on the Cleopatra set. "I could see the way she looked at Burton," he admitted years later. "She had never looked at me that way. Never with that intensity, that passion. I realized I had never really had her heart." The humiliation was compounded by the public nature of his wife's infidelity. Every newspaper and magazine in the world was reporting details of Elizabeth's romance with another man, while Fisher maintained the fiction that his marriage was intact. Sybil Burton Williams, Richard's wife of 13 years, handled the situation with more dignity, but equal pain. A former Welsh actress who had given up her career to support Richard's ambitions, Sybil was raising their 2 daughters while trying to maintain normalcy in an impossible situation. Sybil was a class act, remembered actress Claire Bloom, a friend of the Burton family. She never spoke publicly against Elizabeth or Richard. She never played the victim, but you could see the devastation in her eyes. Unlike Fisher, Sybil didn't attempt to fight for her marriage. Perhaps she understood Richard's nature better than Elizabeth understood Eddie's. Richard had a history of affairs, though none as public or serious as his obsession with Elizabeth. "I think Sybil knew this was different," observed Burton biographer Melvin Bragg. "Richard had had other women, but he had never been consumed by anyone the way he was consumed by Elizabeth. Sybil was too intelligent to fight a battle she couldn't win." The children caught in the middle suffered in ways that wouldn't be fully understood for years. Elizabeth's 3 children, Michael and Christopher Wilding and Liza Todd, were old enough to understand that their mother was causing international scandal. Richard's daughters, Kate and Jessica Burton, watched their family torn apart by global media attention. The children were collateral damage in a very public love affair, noted child psychologist Dr. Robert Coles, who later worked with celebrity families. They had to process not just their parents' divorce, but the whole world's judgment of their parents' behavior. The professional consequences were equally severe. 20th Century Fox executives, already panicking about the film's massive budget overruns, now faced the possibility that religious boycotts and moral outrage would destroy any chance of commercial success. The studio was getting pressure from every direction, recalled Fox executive David Brown. Religious groups threatening boycotts, shareholders demanding explanations for the massive costs. Exhibitors worried that they wouldn't be able to show the film in conservative markets. The Vatican condemnation had practical implications beyond moral judgment. Catholic countries represented a significant portion of international box office revenue. If the church successfully organized boycotts, the film could be banned in dozens of countries. "We were looking at potential losses in the hundreds of millions," Brown explained. "Not just from Cleopatra, but from damage to the studio's relationship with international distributors who didn't want to be associated with morally controversial content." By August 1962, when principal photography finally ended, 2 marriages had been effectively destroyed. 4 children had been traumatized. A major studio had been brought to the brink of bankruptcy, and the world had gotten its first taste of modern celebrity scandal culture. But Elizabeth and Richard's story was far from over. The affair that had shocked the world was about to become a marriage that would define celebrity romance for the next decade. The immediate aftermath of the Cleopatra scandal revealed how completely the affair had changed everyone involved and how it had created new rules for celebrity culture that would last for decades. Elizabeth's divorce from Eddie Fisher was finalized in Mexico in March 1964. ending one of Hollywood's most publicly scrutinized marriages. Fisher, heartbroken and professionally damaged by the scandal, struggled with drug addiction for years afterward. Eddie never really recovered from losing Elizabeth, observed friend and biographer Eddie Fisher Jr. The public humiliation, the way his career suffered because of the association with the scandal, it destroyed him emotionally and professionally. Richard's divorce from Sybil was handled more quietly, but was equally devastating personally. Sybil eventually moved to New York, where she opened a successful nightclub and built a new life away from the shadow of her ex-husband's celebrity. Sybil showed incredible strength in rebuilding her life, noted Burton family friend Brooke Williams. She never spoke bitterly about Richard or Elizabeth, never tried to profit from the scandal. She just focused on her daughters and her own future. Elizabeth and Richard married on March 15, 1964, at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal, with only a handful of witnesses present. The ceremony was simple, almost secretive, a stark contrast to the global media frenzy that had surrounded their affair. After all the scandal and publicity, they wanted something private and real, recalled Elizabeth's friend Roddy McDowell. But even their wedding became international news. There was no escaping the public fascination with their relationship. The marriage itself became a continuation of the scandal that had created it. Elizabeth and Richard's relationship was passionate, tumultuous, and constantly scrutinized by a media that had learned how profitable celebrity romance could be. They became the template for modern celebrity couples, observed cultural historian Neil Gabler. The public appetite for details about their fights, their reconciliations, their lavish lifestyle. It created the blueprint for how celebrity relationships would be covered for the next 50 years. Their legendary fights and reconciliations, their expensive gifts to each other, their multiple separations and remarriages. They divorced in 1974, remarried in 1976, and divorced again in 1976. Provided endless material for a gossip industry that had discovered its most profitable subjects. The Vatican, meanwhile, never officially retracted its condemnation of Elizabeth's erotic vagrancy. Though Pope John XXIII died in 1963, and the Church gradually moved away from direct commentary on celebrity behavior. The Vatican statement was unprecedented and was never repeated, noted Vatican historian Dr. John Allen. It represented a moment when the Catholic Church felt it necessary to assert moral authority over popular culture, but it also demonstrated the limits of that authority in a rapidly secularizing world. The film itself, when finally released in June 1963, was both a commercial success and a critical disappointment. It became the highest-grossing film of 1963, but lost money because of its enormous production costs. Critics generally praised the spectacle while noting that the real-life drama had overshadowed the fictional story. Audiences went to see Elizabeth and Richard's chemistry more than to see Cleopatra and Mark Antony, observed film critic Pauline Kael. The scandal had become more interesting than the movie. For 20th Century Fox, the experience was a cautionary tale about star power, budget control, and the dangers of mixing personal drama with professional obligations. The studio implemented new contract provisions, limiting stars' behavior and requiring morality clauses that hadn't existed before. The Cleopatra affair taught Hollywood that celebrity scandals could be both profitable and dangerous, noted film historian David Thompson. It created the modern understanding that stars' personal lives are products to be managed, marketed, and sometimes contained. The cultural impact extended far beyond Hollywood. The Elizabeth Taylor-Richard Burton affair established the framework for how celebrity relationships would be covered by media, consumed by the public, and judged by moral authorities. It was the birth of modern celebrity culture, concluded media studies professor Mark Dews. The idea that famous people's private lives are public property, that their relationships exist for our entertainment, that their personal choices reflect broader cultural values. All of that started with Liz and Dick. The scandal that began on a Rome film set in 1962 created patterns of celebrity coverage, public fascination, and moral judgment that continue to shape entertainment culture today. Every subsequent celebrity affair, every paparazzi photograph, every social media relationship scandal can trace its origins to the moment when Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton fell in love and the world decided it had a right to watch. The Vatican condemned their erotic vagrancy, but the public couldn't stop consuming every detail of their passion. In the end, Elizabeth and Richard's affair didn't just destroy two marriages. It created a new form of entertainment that turned love into a spectator sport. Behind Hollywood's golden facade, the biggest stars hid the darkest secrets. Every glamorous smile concealed scandals that would shock the world. If you want to uncover more hidden truths about classic Hollywood's biggest legends, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. The real stories are always more shocking than the movies.